Coming up this time on Art Rocks, an invitation to experience dynamic and rarely seen artworks drawn from private collections around Baton Rouge.
It's quite amazing to me that we have this range of work, from French Impressionism to German Expressionism, from Southern visionary outsider African-American art to well-positioned African-American artists who are selling in a professional capacity to Louisiana's best abstract artists.
And building a bridge to success and self-confidence through music.
Singing is my best form of communication. So my message or my art is shared best when I can sing it to you.
That's what's happening this time on Art Rocks.
Art Rocks is made possible by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you.
Hello, I'm James Fox Smith, publisher of Country Roads magazine, and thank you for joining me for Art Rocks. Today we are taking a deep dive into an exceptional exhibit at the LSU Museum of Art. It has taken years to put this body of work together because the pieces within it normally reside in private collections held by 9 families around the Baton Rouge area. Many of these works may never be on public display again because of personal or sentimental value that they represent for their owners. Here's Museum Director Daniel Stetson to guide us through the exhibit, which is aptly called Living with Art.
This show is titled Living with Art, and it really is about that, about living with art, about having a home full of art. And we've compiled this collection from 9 separate collections in our community, collectors that were very generous to us to loan these for the period of time they're loaning them. And it's a variety of work. It's quite amazing to me that we have this range of work, from French Impressionism to German Expressionism, from Southern visionary outsider African-American art to well-positioned African-American artists who are selling in a professional capacity to Louisiana's best abstract artists to decorative arts from the Victorian age. It's a great variety of works that shows the interest, the travels, and really the kind of creativity of collectors. The show is in some ways about the way a collector connects to artists and the way artists connects to collectors and artist institutions. This exhibit takes over 5,000 square feet of our museum. The rest of our museum is devoted to our permanent collection, but I have to say that everything in our permanent collection used to be in somebody's collection, or they gave us funds to help buy it. So if you think about it, all 15,000 square feet of our museum is devoted to collecting, about the joy of it, the thrill of it. This is a project I started really about 4 years ago. Behind me you can see, I think, part of the first gallery that we enter, and maybe Icarus over here. When Too Close to the Sun is Falling, it's a gold patinaed bronze. It's a magnificent piece by Dalou, one of our great American sculptors. There's figurative work in this gallery and a group of landscapes, and the figurative work ranges from self-taught artists to French Nabi post-impressionist artists by Edward Voulard. The landscape art goes from Ansel Adams to a whole variety of different talents that we have. Louis Vallat and Vlaminck behind me over here. A range of talents, and we've combined them in this room where it's figures and landscapes. The Edward Voulard piece is of a woman seated wearing a hat and a cravat, a tie or a scarf, sitting in the studio space of Voulard's home. When you look at this piece, I think there's a real active brushwork, an impressionist style of brushwork, kind of an emotional piece for me when I see it. The light, the shadows that fall in her face. And here's a figure in the studio. It's an active artist's vision. Next to it is a piece by Gerhard Marx. Marx is a German sculptor and artist. He actually was in the Bauhaus, the head of the ceramics area in the Bauhaus in Germany, the famous school of art from the 20s, 30s. And this piece is of a young Orion. Many of us know Orion as that figure up in the sky, and he's the mythic hunter. He's shooting the bow up there in the stars. Quite a beautiful piece. This is a young Orion standing there. This is a boy who happens to become mythological. The next gallery has a great variety of works, and one of my favorite actually is by an artist named Purvis Young. It's of a group of figures with halos, and there's a pregnant woman amongst them. Purvis saw and rendered pregnant figures within his paintings as a symbol of hope. At all times, I think hope is a wonderful thing. Purvis grew up in Overtown in Miami. And actually was incarcerated when he first started to paint. Became well known as a muralist in Miami and elsewhere. Very, very highly collected now. Purvis is a magnificent artist, but the whole section has a variety of talents in there. There is a sculpture of Martin Luther King by Dwight, and it is a piece that he did for Morehouse College. And he was a well-trained artist. Is still somebody you can go online and you can acquire works by him. But he's done large-scale public works. But that's also then right next to a stone sculpture by Pharaoh Baker, a Florida artist, and the sculptures of Emmett Till. Emmett Till was a young man in Mississippi, a teenager, who spoke to a white woman and then was accused of misspeaking and maybe rape. Till was lynched, murdered. His mother, at the time of the funeral, put him in the casket and had it be opened to show what had happened to him. The story of Emmett Till is such a tragic one. The thing that amazes me, just a couple weeks before we installed that piece, at the federal level through the House of Representatives, lynching was declared finally a federal hate crime. And I see that sculpture and it hits me right in the gut. Near it, there's a photograph of Martin Luther King standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial saying, "I have a dream." You have what's going on in the country and the things that turn the tide that helped to create the opportunity for the Civil Rights Act that Lyndon Johnson signed. And some of the things we still face today are still alive. Below the Martin Luther King, there's a photograph of the riots in Birmingham where they're hosing the crowds. And the photographer talks about it in a way I think is wonderful. This particular photograph, he has a whole series of them. This one is as the crowd has started to turn itself into a block. And there's a photograph of a young man holding his arms out, getting hit by the fire hoses. And fire hoses are so powerful, they can almost tear your skin off. And in the photo that we have, it's when they've learned to gather as a force kind of together, and hitting them as a group, they could withstand it more. They would rotate through the front people and they would stand there for this in protest to all that was happening in the South. So you have that sort of thing happening with Martin Luther King speaking, and you have next to it that painting by Purvis Young of Hope. I think that it becomes powerful as you walk through. There's some things that are here for pure beauty, as art can be, and there are other things here that really are to stimulate your thinking and maybe your self-reflection on the times we live in now in our own communities. There's two Clementine Hunters in the show. Clementine Hunter was raised on a plantation and learned to paint, and paints in what some call a folk style. I would actually say that's not the proper word for it. She was an outsider, visionary artist, and developed her own talent and character. The two paintings we have in the show, the one I want to speak of is of a black crucifixion. It is Christ as a black figure on the cross attended by two angels. I just think it's a very special painting, and it really references the history of the inclusion that religion can have and that Christ can have. I think it touches on some of those things. And it's not very far away from a wood piece by Frank Hayden. Hayden was one of our great Louisiana sculptors. Many people know his bronzes and his woodworks. He taught at Southern University for a real long time, studied at Notre Dame. He's just an incredible artist with major public sculptures here in Baton Rouge. But the piece that I want to focus on is one called Angel of Death. And it's his outstretched armed figure that has all of these little tiny figures in wood attached to it. And as you look at part of it, you'll see there's one spot where there's a gap in the figures that are riding on the Angel of Death. And Frank Hayden told the collector that that was there because it's an empty spot because there's always room for one more. That's next to a painting by Pharaoh Baker that is about sitting between two opinions. And the two opinions are this figure. One side he's looking into a bar and at a woman in the bar and he's having a drink. The other side he's looking at Christ on the cross. So you have the Angel of Death next to somebody trying to make a decision about their life next to a crucifixion. Around the corner is In God. It's a piece that is carved in a sandstone that was used in metal casting and stuff in Birmingham by another outsider artist from Birmingham. And so you have that whole section that talks about faith, religion, and a little bit about a thoughtful place for, I think, any visitor to spend a moment. There's another section of our show that has a lot of abstract art, and some figures that are in there prominently are George Dunbar, Ida Kohlmeyer, and Lin Emery. The two George Dunbar pieces we have, I think, are particularly important. One, a fairly early untitled piece that has a textured relief surface done in his silver leaf that is really gorgeous. It's an abstract piece that has dimension to it because of the way he builds up the surface. The other one's from his Lacoin series, which was named for a subdivision that he as a developer started to develop. And it is a very geometric piece, very flat, where it is etched into it, where the metal kind of comes through. There's a scratch section, almost like an erasure below. It has a kind of a symmetry and a balance to it that I find compelling. Very near it, there's a tall turret piece by Ida Kohlmeyer. Ida's one of our great painters and sculptors. Behind it's one of her paintings also with her pictographs in it. And then down the ways from it, there is a menorah that she did that when you see pictures of it, it reminds me of Dr. Seuss. Very colorful and wonderful menorah. The collector, frankly, just last year bought it at auction. He and I discussed it. I encouraged him, and I'm so glad he did because it is a spectacular piece. So you have a painting by Ida Kohlmeyer, you have a large sculptural piece. And you also have this kind of singular piece of the menorah by her. So it's a variety work there. Then we have one Lin Emery mobile in the show that is really quite elegant. It's a smaller piece, but it sits in the home on a pedestal. And it is just a wonderful kind of gentle piece that can move in any kind of wind. And then one last one I'll mention is a John Scott piece. Many people know John. He worked out of New Orleans, taught for many years, taught artists around the state, around the world, was one of the Genius Award winners with a MacArthur Fellowship. And we have a painted metal, small, kinetic piece that has arms that kind of move. If you come to visit, you don't touch sculptures in museums, but in fact it does generate some movement. His sense of color on it is really dynamic, I think, and there's even a stenciled figure in one kind of detail of the work. It's fun to see just that one section of that many of the best of Louisiana in the room. You come around past the John Scott sculpture and you start to come into some of the German pieces. There's a significant collection of German art here in Baton Rouge, and we were able to borrow significant numbers. The first one is by Frederick Kalmorgan, and it is a large painting that is beautiful in detail. It's a 19th century realism, a northern realist painting from that period, 1898 I think it is. And it shows a group of people that have been harvesting in the field. If you look in the left foreground, you see there's some bread left behind. There's a big sigh that has just been dropped. They've been right in the media at work, and they're all running. And there's a person on the horse on the right side even running, heading towards what you see off in the distance to the back left is the village, and the village is on fire. I don't know what building is on fire, but it is a tragedy, and it's all hands on deck, right? Everybody dropped everything they're doing and they're heading to help. Well, interestingly enough, those are across from two photographs from the Democracy Project that was done in New York City following the tragedy of 9/11. So you have these people in the 19th century running to this tragedy in their village, and across from them are photographs of New York. One shows the heroes, firemen actually rescuing, and above it actually is a photograph of a remnant of the tower, the bottom part that reminds me of a cathedral with a Coca-Cola truck sitting in front of it. What's more American? So you go from the real world of tragedy and the kind of pandemic that the world is struggling through in the 2020, how we all come together and how we work together, and I think that's real important. And just that one thing kind of across the room from each other brings all that out for me. And I hope viewers can be that thoughtful as they walk through. Right next to the photographs of 9/11 is a small section of pop art. I didn't find a lot of pop art in the collections I saw, but I found some significant ones. There's a wonderful screen print by Andy Warhol. I think it's Consommé Soup. And just to tell briefly that story, the collector was a medical student in New York City. He grew up there, but he was a student. He actually bought that from Warhol as a student. I say that because this exhibit is about how do people collect and what do they collect. Everything in these galleries reflect people that live here. Well, he bought that right from the artist. Next to it, there are two photographs by Edelman. He also did the Martin Luther King one and the Birmingham riot photo. These two photographs are of Andy Warhol, and both of them are wonderful. One, he's reclining on his velvet couch in the factory, which is his studio in New York, his famous studio, and there's an image of Jackie O over his shoulder, which is kind of classic. But below it, it was staged, but it's a wonderful photograph of Andy Warhol with his arms full of Campbell's soup and the basket full of that and some other products. Just to think of Andy shopping for the products relates to his work. And then immediately next to those is a small piece by the artist Red Grooms. Red Grooms is a great painter and sculptor. This is a sculptopictorama. It is a three-dimensional print. He does lithography that he then assembles into a shadow box, maybe 6 inches deep. And it's of a New York newsstand. And I think it's wonderful to go look at the details of it. One of the things I love in there is that you can actually buy the complete Dickens. How many newsstands can you buy the complete Dickens at? A detail that you can't really see unless you're very tall. Actually, on the top of it, there's pigeons on the roof of the newsstand. As you turn and travel from the 19th century German painting and go into the next gallery, the walls you're surrounded with are all German artists. Predominantly, the major figures in there are Emile Nolde. Emile was a very important painter, particularly his watercolors, and there's a set of 4 of them that are elegant. I really highly recommend looking at him. He was famous for what is called wet and wet painting. And it's very different than some ways of painting watercolor. There's one of two different kinds of flowers, and the shadows are exquisite. There's a snow scene in northern Germany that I think is really special. So you'll see those. There's a section also where there are his prints and Erich Heckel's prints. Expressionists were especially well known for their printmaking. Some fairly large scale, some small. There's a small one of a storm that I find compelling. Very, very wonderful to look at in terms of media and what Expressionism is, a move away from the realism, if you will, of that big painting. The other artist in that room is Paula Modersohn Becker and her husband Otto Modersohn. And there's a small set of works, 3 of hers and 1 of his, and there's also a small bronze bust of her by another artist. The painting that's in there of a young woman in a blue dress, she's faceless, standing in a field. It looks to me as if it's an unfinished work. We know that it was within the last 2 years of her death. I think it may have been within the last year of her death. She died at age 32 from complications following a pregnancy. The painting by Otto is a beautiful bucolic scene of water, the way it glistens. It's really beautiful. Paula Modersohn Becker's paintings are very rare. She's most well known for self-portraits and even nude self-portraits and portraits of women. The year before her death, she had an exhibit where she was called a good artist for a woman. In the middle of the German Expressionist kind of gathering, if you will, there's actually work totally unrelated to that. There is one single pedestal of 3 glassworks on it. There's a beautiful paired bowl by Tiffany in his blue Ariel. It's just a gorgeous piece. Very gentle kind of style, simple in its way, but reminds one of his elegance, I think. Up to the left behind it is a golden vessel, a larger vase form by Frederick Carter. Frederick Carter was the founder of Steuben. So you have Tiffany, who is the great master of glass, and there are even in Baton Rouge, I know that there is a church that has stained glass windows by Tiffany. You can find them all over. You also have Frederick Carter, the founder of Steuben, 2 of the greatest. Then you have a singular blue vase with the vine form on the outside by Tommy Rush. Tommy is a contemporary artist working in Knoxville. She and her husband have a studio there. She's very active. So she's a singular glass artist. And there's so many, starting with Dale Chihuly and his school and others that taught it before him in Wisconsin around the country. There's great glass being made. So I put them all together to talk about it because at one point Carter and Tiffany were just artists. They weren't factories. It became more. Now off behind those, off to the left, there is a wonderful wall case that is full of Tiffany Desk Set items. When you look at it, you'll see different patterns. You'll see one picture frame in the grapevine pattern. You'll see quite a number of pieces in the pine needle pattern. You'll see all the different little lines. When you start to look at those pieces, whether it's one of the boxes or the picture frames or the pen stand or the pen itself, you start to see these elements and you'll see the differences of glass and the use of metal, the colors of patina. You see some rather dark pieces in there that are called the Zodiac style. It was one of his first ones he did. They were well collected, and the Zodiac had Zodiac figures on them, and they're a different patina. You could buy those. There are catalogs where you could order what you wanted for your desk set. And I think that's kind of wonderful to think about. And this one collector has a variety of styles. And as you look through it, you'll see about a dozen different patterns. There are several pen knives or letter openers, and every one of those is a different style in there. If you go into the very last gallery, it's a small, narrower gallery. There's a nice place to sit down where you can just read a book, because we have a couple books sitting in there. You can also just study the works around you and relax while you're in the show. And there are several works on the wall. Vincenzo Vella's piece, it is The Last Days of Napoleon. It's a 19th century bronze, and when I look at it, I mean, most people know the story of Napoleon, you know, you don't want to get to your Waterloo, and he ended up on an island in exile. There's Napoleon. Here is his last days, seated in this chair, slumped, if you will, with his bathrobe on, at least looks like to me. It's fancy, but it's kind of fallen down at the neck. On his lap is a map of Europe, the once great empire that he was to hold. It's a wonderful kind of comment. And then below it, there's a contemporary bronze called a Roman foot, hearkening back to classicism. There's kind of a funny dialogue with a contemporary bronze work of a fragment of classic history against this great figure of historic history. Next to that, there is a case full of Parian ware. Parian ware is a special kind of porcelain done in the Victorian era. And if you think about it, it was a way for people to have things that look like Carrara marble in their home. These were done as copies from sculptural forms done by a unique process of miniaturization and scaling. In this case is a bust of Queen Victoria. Most people that know Parian wear have seen a lot of the busts. Those are fairly common. Still, I mean, particularly lovely, and I think having Queen Victoria in there is really powerful. You'll find Petrarch, you'll find Shakespeare, you'll find Dante. Dante might be my favorite one in the case. Look at his face. That's a serious man writing serious stuff. Kind of behind the chairs, there's some pieces of artists from Louisiana also that I just encourage you to look at. One of my favorite ones is by Carolyn Durier, and it's just a face of a woman done in chalk, and she's got kind of a scowl on her face. Carolyn was a very important artist in the state, knew Diego Rivera, was of that era, helped to found the art department at LSU, invented methods and researched special methods in printmaking. This is a chalk drawing by her. And if you look very closely down by her signature, just above the mat, you can see the price, $26. I like to point that out to people because it doesn't have to cost a lot. And that great art is made at every age. There are great students at LSU. There are great MFA graduates happening all over this country. There are faculty that are geniuses at work. It's possible to have original great art at your home instead of reproductions. And frankly, I think it's better to live with art than to not live with art. You know, living without it is kind of a vacuum. I'd love it all. This is a powerful collection, and it would only enhance what we hold. And our collection itself, we have over 6,500 works of art in our collection, from decorative art and children's toys to Chinese jade to 16th century British portraiture to contemporary glasswork by Dale Chihuly and contemporary paintings by artists from our own state. It's a great variety of work in some key categories. The artwork was either donated by an artist or a collector, or the money that bought it was donated by somebody to make it possible that we could buy it. So when you go in and you look at our permanent collection, any museum's permanent collection, know that it's a direct reflection of the supporters and the interests of the people that are in your community, the people that are around you. The bigger the museum, maybe the bigger the community.
The Living with Art exhibit at the LSU Museum of Art has been extended through the end of September. Stepping away now from the visual to the performing arts, Houston, Texas-based singer and nurse Christina Wells has always found that she communicates best through music. Her journey is one of overcoming obstacles to achieve dreams, and it's inspirational. Let's listen as Christina explains the story of how she got to America's Got Talent and beyond.
I am not a stranger to the dark.
I'm able to communicate things singing that I can't find words to say.
'Cause we don't want your broken heart.
Like when I was a young girl and I would have a bad day at school or someone was mean to me, I had a tape that I had made, a mixed tape of Whitney Houston and, you know, songs from Bodyguard and stuff like that. And I would sit and I would sing these songs until I felt better.
I know that there's a place for us, for we are glorious.
And so singing became my coping mechanism.
When the sharpest words want to cut me down.
You know, I had been in the choir and we had gone to like all these other competitions with the choir and people would mention me.
I am brave. I am
that girl in the front on the left. Oh, she's got a voice.
This is me. Look out, 'cause here I come.
And I started to let myself actually dream of it. And I started to imagine myself on Broadway and like entertaining people with my voice and my witty repartee. And this is where the infamous Astroworld audition comes in. I'm gonna go and audition for Astroworld because they were gonna do this big Motown review. And I go off and I'm wailing and doing my own thing and riffing and stuff. And I get this standing ovation from the other auditioners. And my heart lights up and I'm like, I can sing. Well, then came the final call and they cut me. And I had spent so much time there that week, I was so surprised. And so when they cut me, I went over to the production team, the staff, and I was like, can you tell me why you decided not to take me? Because maybe I could figure something out. And they said, we only want to have one black female voice in this review. So we're going to combine whoever sings Aretha with Whitney, and you can't wear the clothes. You're too heavy. My feelings were deeply hurt. And I didn't sing at anything for 10 years. At the nurse's station at the hospital one day, I was like, I need a place to sing. And somebody mentioned to me this community theater in Deer Park called Art Park Players. They were looking to cast for their production of Hairspray. And that is where I learned the song, I Know Where I've Been. I was just stunned at people's reaction to me because I thought all of my shine as a singer and as a performer had like worn off, you know? And I still wasn't convinced. So the show ended and I was like, okay, and I went back to work. And then a friend of mine reached out to me and she told me about this audition for this competition downtown called Pride Superstar. Like my whole world shifted and I didn't know it was shifting. You know what I mean? I was just standing on the stage like, I hope they like this, and then they did, and then I won. And I went and recorded I Know Where I've Been as a single.
There's a light in the darkness.
America's Got Talent sees that music video.
Is black as my skin.
And I went to audition for the executive producers.
Showing me the way.
And I was on there way longer than I thought I ever would be.
But I know where I've been.
When I was on the show, I realized that we can teach people in multiple ways, but when they're being entertained at the same time, the message goes in so much deeper.
That comes from deep within.
Singing is my best form of communication. So my message or my art is shared best when I can sing it to
I
you.
pray the answers up ahead.
It's all connected, and it's this message I want to share with the world that I've always wanted to share. And it comes from so many times that I have been shut down and told that I couldn't do things. And then you sit and you're like, but why can't I? And when someone's like, well, you know, going to school as a single mom, no. Or when I want to go to nursing school and they're like, and work, I don't think so, honey. Every time someone puts a hurdle in front of me, I'm like, what do you mean? Why can't I do it?
I give thanks to my God, 'cause I know where I've been.
Now it's time for the Art Rocks Name That Artist pop quiz. We're going to show you a masterpiece by a famous Louisiana artist and challenge you to tell us who created it. First viewer to send in the correct answer will win a pair of free passes to visit the LSU Museum of Art in downtown Baton Rouge. This piece is by an artist born in New Orleans and primarily known for paintings and drawings depicting patterns in nature. So this ceramic represents a bit of a departure. If you think you know who created that, email your answer to the address on your screen. First correct response receives 2 free passes to visit the Museum of Art on the date of their choosing. And that is that for this edition of Art Rocks. But remember, all the episodes and segments of the show are archived at lpb.org/artrocks. In between programs, Country Roads Magazine makes a great resource for learning more about what makes Louisiana culture unique, close to home and all around the state. So until next week, I've been James Fox Smith, and thanks to you for watching.